Well, welcome to the Duluth Art Institute Professional Development Series. My name is Jesse Switters. I am the education coordinator here at the DAI. And we are actually halfway through our 7-week professional development program. And I just have to shout out the grant that made it all possible. It is a grant through the Minnesota State Arts Board. And in the past couple of weeks, we've covered everything from grant writing, game design, and breaking into the tattoo industry. And then this week, we're going to cover a little bit more of a broader topic, but specifically through the lens of freelance artist Kevin Moore. And before I read your bio, Kevin, I just want to say hi. Thank you for joining me. It's the end of the workday, so I really appreciate you.
Oh, it's not the end of the workday for me. This is great. I get to call out early. So yeah, I'm over in Vancouver, so you guys are ahead of me.
Yes,
Take your
absolutely.
time.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So, Kevin is a seasoned graphic designer. He's based in British Columbia, Canada. He lives in a cozy home with his wife, Elizabeth, their son, Fox, and a collection of beloved pets. His journey into design began back in 2000 when he started creating collages for his favorite bands during high school. And things really kicked off when his sister took him to his first all ages gig. That experience sparked a love for local music, and Kevin became a regular at shows in his community. Soon he was offering free and, by his own admission, crappy Photoshop work to local bands. And with time, Kevin honed his skills. He started taking his craft seriously and he began landing paying gigs. His first major project was creating album packaging for a well known local band in 2001. And Kevin has no formal training. He learned on the job, a trial by fire, and it really paid off because the bands that he worked with started touring, they started signing with labels, and they it seems like they brought him with. So Kevin's portfolio includes architects, insurance brokers, hockey teams, and an impressive number of rock, pop, and heavy metal bands. So, and I can tell from your backdrop there that there's plenty of music in your life too. So, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. You pretty much nailed it there. That's like pretty much the whole story. I know in there it says like I work for hockey teams and some architects, and I did early on in my career. When I started, I was taking lots of stuff just from wherever I could get it. And, we'll dive into that more as being a freelancer. There is that phase of like you just take the work and you do the work and slowly over time it'll funnel down into the field you would want to stick in. So I've been at it for now just about 25 years and I'm mostly like 99.9% music. So I work at BMG Music, which is a massive record label publishing, but I got through there through Rise Records, and that's where Jesse, you'll know I connected you with the band Dance Gavin Dance that we were talking about earlier. They're on Rise Records. One of my biggest clients, Spirit Box, is on Rise Records, and I've done a bunch of stuff. That's my record for their. That's my. I don't know if it's actually platinum, it's silver or something. But good sales for that record. And there's my Dance Gavin Dance plaque. So
Oh,
those were Rise bands. And then Rise got bought by BMG. And so I was able to sort of move into the major label world. And now I get to work for some, like other bands on BMG, like Billy Howardell, who was in A Perfect Circle, who I love. I did his album packaging. I've done stuff for System of a Down. I've done stuff for Korn. I've done stuff for so many bands. It's awesome. But at the beginning, at the time, it was like, taking anything and everything I could, including hockey teams and architecture companies.
yeah. Well,
So, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
oh yeah, no, I really can appreciate that you've been going at this for 20 years now because you know what it's like to be a beginner, and I'm really glad you touched on taking every gig that comes your way, because
Mhm.
looking back, there is definitely that time when you literally just say yes. Sometimes I remember when I did my first album cover, it was for like a beefy 5 layer burrito.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
start really small and then you just work your way up. But yeah, I appreciate that you've been on that entire arc of starting off, from zero and then all the way to where you're at now. So can you tell me a little bit about, you said you work in the music industry almost exclusively. Can you tell me a little bit about what that's like working for them? What do bands and musicians need design work for specifically?
So when I started as a freelancer, I was doing album covers and merchandise, lots of t-shirts. That is kind of where I started. I feel like that's a really good place to get in. Bands of all sizes need t-shirts. So getting in and doing t-shirts was a great start. Plus, excuse me, sorry, I'm drinking a sparkling water, so it's coming back with a vengeance right now.
Yeah, it's a healthier, but it'll talk back to you.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so I started with merch because lots of local bands need merch. Every local band needs merch. And merch printing, like shirt printing, you need well, maybe that's different. Nowadays you can print a lot more full color stuff is more available, but back when I started, screen printing was essentially the only way. So learning the limitations of screen printing, half toning, that kind of stuff, and like, working with the fine details of what screens are capable of doing and making sure your design translates. So I learned a lot that ended up becoming a superpower for me of like having this knowledge of like how it's actually going to work and not just being an internet-based designer. Because I feel like a lot of people are designers nowadays, but then a lot of people don't know, how paper stocks work, how fabric works, how halftones work, how those things, the actual application of it. So I really count my lucky stars for starting when I did and having that knowledge base. But yeah, so I started in merch, and then when I was hired by Rise, it was actually mostly for social media. They needed guys to make like every band needs so much social media stuff. So I was doing like Instagram stories and Instagram squares, like new single out now, blah blah blah, lots of video stuff. And I kind of lied on my resume that I could do video stuff, and I had to learn it as I went. Like I said, I've always been like, yeah, I'll just figure it out. And then I got really into video as well. And so I was doing lots of ads for Rise Records when I started there. And then that snowballed to them seeing like, oh, you do packaging and you do whatever. I did do some packages for them. That's how I started. I started with Memphis Mayfire, but then they didn't keep coming back to me for packages. They just kept coming back to me for socials. So I kind of kept squeezing myself in there. And now I just exclusively do packaging there. So they have a whole department for social media. And my whole job at BMG is just album packaging, which is great. It's awesome. Um, but yeah, I would say if anybody wanted to get started in working for bands, like 9 times out of 10, I'd just say make t-shirt designs and give them to bands. Like I don't want to condone like working for free because like that's, not how life works, but there's also a little bit of like you got to put yourself out there and you got to make yourself valuable.
Mhm.
And so many people are designers that if you can like make a t-shirt that you like that is good and you know is good and it's for your all-time favorite band, like send it to them. Send it over Messenger. Like, hey, I'm a designer. I made this. If you want it, you know what I mean? That's boom. That's
Yeah.
huge. That's massive. And then that snowballs. And everything I've done is just snowballed from like you said in my bio, my sister taking me to my first show. And she pumped my tires to a local band that I was an artist. I didn't know how to design, but she was like, my brother can make your album art. And I was like, so I like had to go home and get like a pirated version of Photoshop and like learn how to do this. And it's just like this constant snowball of like, I always think I landed here kind of totally by accident.
I love it. I just sharing brief. I know that we have a lot of intersections. I know I've veered a little more into comics, but I did spend some time in the music design world. My work started by my friends all bringing my sketch on a notebook paper to the art teacher at the school, and he scanned it in and cleaned it up. So they made. I got my first T-shirt design without even really knowing it. So I think it's great that music kind of tends to pull you in just a really organic way. And I think that tracks with when you have two art forms just kind of colliding. I think it's really fun having that kind of energy playing off of each other. Can you tell me a little bit about like how music influences your work?
Yeah, so it's actually funny. I used to listen to music all the time while I worked, and I would just have it on and going forever. And in the last couple of years, I really haven't. I like work in silence, which is weird. And I know people think that's super strange, but I find now like I work in silence. So I actually for currently. I find myself very out of touch with music, and I mostly just listen to like what I'm working on, so I can become familiar with like what I'm doing. And I always like it. Like I love music and I always have loved music. But the influence really goes back to like when I was younger and that I remember grabbing like I loved album art. I was started a band when I was in like grade six, and the first thing I did before we even knew how to play a song is like I cut out paper and folded it like a cassette tape and like put it into a cassette case and like drew a cover and then had my mom go to work and photocopied a bunch and I made 100 boxes for tapes that don't exist yet. Like it's like when our album is done, we didn't even write a song, but I had put song names that I was like, these are what our songs have to be called because I've done the packaging already. You know what I mean? Like I did it like totally backwards. And that tape never came to be, obviously. But yeah, like I'm looking at my CDs here. It was Zayo, self-titled, was the first album I looked at. That came out in '99, I want to say. 99 and I was 2000. So this is like the crux of it all, this album. I saw this and I was like, this is what I want to do. This is awesome. And it was done by Don Clark at Invisible Creature.
That is
So,
great. I love that you have a collection of physical media there.
oh man, I know it's, and I have a whole wall of vinyl records upstairs. These are all like my overstock vinyl that I get shipped to me from the label of like stuff I've worked on. So I have like extras of everything. And, when I have friends over, I'm like passing out records like, here, take this, take this. But
It's
yeah,
Christmas
no,
every day at Kevin's place.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, so the reason I got into this whole thing was because of music, and it was like and I loved just what you were saying, the two worlds colliding. So it was like I started with the passion for the music, and then it was like, oh, I love that like there's these images that represent it, and they become, they can be iconic or they can mean something. Like I love that record by Zayo. How many people do you know that know Zayo? Like nobody, but it's special to me, right? So it's like everything we do, regardless if it becomes, an iconic album cover like Fleetwood Mac or whatever, or a totally obscure record that nobody's heard of. There's somebody, hopefully, out there that it connects with and they like. And it's just like that's what that was for me. Um, yeah, so then I was in bands, always playing music and then touring and stuff. And that was like making t-shirts and making, so there was this side, it always ran parallel that I was like touring with bands and those bands would need merch. So they'd be like, "Oh, talk to Kevin, our guitar player," and then I would do their merch, and it was made it really great for making money on tour because on tour you don't make money. So I had this like little side hustle that I could do, and laptops were so expensive back then, so it was literally like whoever's house we ended up sleeping at that night, I'd be like, "Do you have a computer?" I would crack Photoshop on that computer. I would download like the five brushes I knew of and like make something and then send it to them and then delete off this like family computer that I would download like the cracked version of. That's what I did for real. It was brutal, but I did it all the time in every town. And then yeah, over time that pivoted. I still love music, but now it's like now I'm designing and I'm following the band. I still play music, but like even the band knows that I'm in, they know that I haven't been able to make shows. They have a fill-in bass player all the time because I'm like, no, I have a photo shoot that weekend with a client, and that's my priority, right? Where it flipped to like design is my thing, and that's where I'm staying.
That's great. You found you experienced it all and you finally found settled into what you want to do. That's great.
Totally.
So I'm really could talk to you all night about the stories from the road and from from your experience being in a band and designing. But for
Mhm.
this professional development, I really wanted to give our listeners some tools and some tangible things that you can share that you've learned specifically about your portfolio itself. Like how do you develop work because you talked a little bit about sending, just like a little sample to trying to put yourself out there. But as far as developing a portfolio that you can start to have a presence and, you start putting your website out there and start throwing your hat in the ring for jobs and gigs. What would you recommend and what would be your advice for an artist for building a portfolio that gets them noticed?
So it's tough because I got to sort of miss all my early years of totally sucking. Um, isn't anywhere to be found on the internet. It was all like pre-social media. pre-Instagram, maybe a bit on MySpace, but then MySpace thankfully wiped their everything, so it doesn't exist anymore. So a part of me wants to say like put up everything, like just share your work, share your work, share your work like crazy. But at the same time, um, you only have so many opportunities for a first impression. And um, I know as an artist, it can be hard to
Can I
know
relate
when
to
something,
value?
to know when something is ready enough to put it out, and have that confidence in it.
Hmm.
But I could be totally wrong. Like I said, like I didn't experience that part of it. I was able to start putting stuff on social media after I'd already like kind of honed my craft a bit. So it really was a great experience for me because I went into like posting, 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 and almost right away, like I was getting hit up for jobs. Like I didn't have to go through my growing pains in the public eye. And the growing pains I was going through was, I was young and working at home in my parents' basement, not paying rent. You know what I mean? So my life experience of like doing this and starting when I started, I know isn't realistic to what most people go through. So I think if I was to give an answer in terms of like
Hey, Kevin, can I
build
relate
a po-
to value?
yeah, yeah, totally.
So, so you started in 2000, and this is a rare episode where I actually have some experience in the field where, the host is, the guest is, has. So I started in 2009, so like 9 years after you started. So I did have some of that early social media stuff kind of in the mix. But
Mhm.
from my experience, we talked about it earlier before the episode that having those peers of creators around you is really important. So I know that you
Right.
you started off in a different time, but I think
Mhm.
something that's timeless and it feeds into your experience being in the music industry itself. Maybe if you could expand on how working with other artists and building a community of artists helps hone your craft. I know
That's
you connect each other with
totally good.
jobs and
Yeah.
gigs. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because when I was coming into it, and kind of at the point where I was taking smaller artists like Alex, like do you know Alex Buhaj?
Yeah.
Like I got him a job at Rise. So we work together. So he works at Rise with me. But like yeah, so that was the community of artists and the social media aspect of like being on, it was a Facebook group that we met in, the Graphic Arts Collective or the Design League. Um, but just sharing your stuff and sharing it for critique and sharing it for feedback. And feedback and critique can really suck and it can really hurt, but it's super crucial in those beginning stages of like, and just accepting that like at the beginning, like we all stink, like I stunk, it was like whatever, but I had people, obviously there's always going to be those people on the internet that have to say the meanest thing possible in the meanest way. And you got to kind of know how to siphon through that, which I think is a, global experience. We all know that for anything we're doing. But then, there's the people that are like, hey, this is good, but I think you want to try like make the type larger or, your kerning is off. Like, oh, what's kerning? Learning about how letters fit together and like those little steps. So, having that community was really huge. And it helped me a lot. Even when I felt like I came in honed, I still was like sharing my work with like Tom Gordon, who's just, a master, and Don and Ryan Clark, who did that like Zao art, like having these guys I looked up to give me advice and like, hey, this is how this is going to work best. I see what you're trying to do. You didn't nail it there, but I would try it this way, and positive what do you call it? Constructive criticism,
Yep.
um, rather than just people being like, this sucks. Um, but I would do that first, I think, prior to just sharing to the public, maybe on like an Instagram portfolio sort of idea. Like, sort of try and hone your craft a little bit. Don't wait till it's perfect because it's never good. Like, I think that's the other thing about artists is like, you're never going to be like, this is perfect. Because as soon as an artist, in my opinion, I've said this a few times, is like, as soon as an artist is like, I'm done, this is perfect, then you've done it. Like, there's nowhere to go. Like, I continually am berating myself and beating myself up because through the process of doing something, I learned this many things, and then that thing comes out, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I had a chance to do it again because now I know this much stuff more fluently. And then that builds, and then that builds, and then that builds. And so I'm always sort of, for lack of a better term, hating my own work in an effort to make myself better, right? So I don't want you to take what I'm saying about like hone your craft, don't share your stuff till it's perfect. That's not what I mean. You're always going to critique yourself,
Hmm.
but there's something about throwing it
Surrounding
around a few
yourself.
peers and having feedback and having that community around you to sort of like build it. And that's a good building spot. Otherwise, you just feel like you're sort of swinging in the dark because the internet is so vast and people are just mean. Where if you can have some close friends, and sort of tighten the bolts a little bit within the comfort of your community, and maybe they won't. Maybe your stuff will come out. Maybe you just have it. Maybe it's like, hey, this is great. And then you share it out to the world, you know what I mean? And I would do that a ton. So you're exactly right to bring that up, and that totally tightens up my idea because I don't want anyone watching this to think that I'm saying to not share your stuff till it's perfect. But like you don't just want to throw everything out there shotgun blast style to see what sticks necessarily, because you want people to come to your portfolio and be wowed within reason, not like, oh, I don't, you know, I don't understand what this vision is, what this aesthetic is. What is your brand as a designer? What are you bringing to the table, right? And sort of honing that as like Jesse, I'm sure you could say like my style is very much uh I'm very much photography based, very, very heavily influenced by typography, and large type. I have some signature moves that I do and lots of stuff. So, and those things I felt like I established pretty early, not out of any, genius sort of like, oh, here's this my brilliant idea. I probably ripped it off from some magazine I saw. You know what I mean? Like
Yep,
something I thought was cool, and then I just kept doing it, and it became synonymous with the work that I do. And that sort of comes out um, fairly early on if you were to scroll through my Instagram. That being said, I've gone through and deleted a lot of old posts. Like
yes.
we all do it. We all go through and be like,
Oh,
ugh.
that looked good back then.
Yeah, yeah,
But
exactly.
on the flip side, there are sometimes things that you post from years ago that maybe are come up in like your photo reel or something in your cloud storage where you're like, oh man, that was better than I thought it was. I didn't like
Mhm.
it back then, but so it can play both ways, I think.
100%. Totally. You're 100% correct. Yeah, I love doing like throwback posts to like, because I still like some of my favorite designs. Like my favorite layout I ever did was uh Cane Hill, Too Far Gone. And that was just such a fun layout where they kind of just let me do whatever I wanted to do. The cover is like, okay, whatever. Like they wanted a mosquito on the cover, it's fine. But then the inside was like, I just got to have fun and they approved everything. And I still love it. And that was 2018. So, I mean,
Oh,
we're coming up, like that's been out for a while now. You know what I mean? Like we're coming up to what is that, 7 or 8 years? And I still just like, I love it. So it's nice being able to throw back and be like, yeah, I was right then. There's a lot of stuff I've been wrong about, but I made some right design choices then.
that's great. Yeah, I there's it's always nice to look back. You're looking back almost a decade and seeing stuff you like, so that,
Hmm.
that gives me hope. I think you look back, maybe there's a threshold you hit where you can look back 10 years and be like, all right, I'm happy with where I was 10 years ago. So
Right.
you've kind of seen enough to kind of find that point where your work kind of hit a level where a plateau, not a plateau as in the point of you're not going to grow, but
I
like,
know what you mean, but it's like a certain standard of like goodness.
yeah, yeah, good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I don't get me wrong. I still put out, if I can take a sidebar here, um, I love my job and I love what I do, but it's a huge thing with freelancing and something I definitely wanted to hit on today. What we talked about is your clients and like different clients and learning how to deal with difficult clients. And this year I did the album art, which I consider to be one of the worst album covers I've ever, 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 ever done for Sum 41, the new Sum 41 album, their like last album, Heaven and Hell. I did the art for that record. And it was a miserable experience. It was really hard. Having working with, you know, high-end clients that have five managers and, and everyone has their say and it's designed by committee and everyone's giving, oh, can we do this? Can we do this? Can, and I'm just like, this is not good. Like, just let me, didn't you hire me? Yeah, God, it's awful. The cover is brutal, man. You'll be able to see like different perspective. There's different perspectives happening that make no sense. That was literally like asked of me, like make heaven and hell like a little more of a tilt than the Sum 41 logo that are both on perspective lines. And I was like, but this is wrong. No, it doesn't matter. It's more punk rock. And I'm like, it's not more punk rock. It just sucks. Like, so, there's I know what you're saying about you get to a point, you plateau in this to a certain level, but at the end of the day, as a designer, as a freelancer, it's really hard to put your ego aside and be like, the client has hired me to do what they want. I wish they would listen to me, that that would be nice, but they don't always. And the thing is you can dig your heels in the sand and be like, whatever, and you can fight back on every little thing and make your life miserable, or you can just do what they say, collect the check, and be done with it. And like sometimes you just have to do that. And to be completely honest, the Sum 41, I think I did somewhere in the realm of like 80 something covers, like different covers for them. Um, Many of which I'm so proud of and I love, like just such great covers in my opinion that I was like, this is the one. They're definitely going to approve this. And it was like, nah, we don't like it. And I'm like, Bart. So that happens at when you're pardon the hand gesture. I don't mean to be like, it happens when you're at this level and it happens when you're at this level. I don't think that I'm at this level, but I know it happens across the board.
Mhm.
I know it happens to I've my career, I've been, benefited enough to become friends with many great designers, and every amazing designer has a horror story about just having to listen to the client, even though the client is totally wrong, and we know the client is wrong. And you put out something that's lackluster and not good at all. But what is our job there? Like, what's the line? It's like, hey, you've hired me, you're hiring my eye. I've firmly pushed back with my opposition to your design ideas. You're still not listening. So then you're a big band. I need to save face. I need to be agreeable to a point so that
Yeah.
they're not going around being like he was awful to work with and then I never work again. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? There's just like such a hard line, or not a hard line, such a gray area, I guess, of like where you have to make this hard decision of like, how am I going to be perceived here? Am I going to let my ego take over and be like, I'm not doing this anymore because this sucks?
Mhm.
Or I'll get this done to your standard, but don't put my name in it. And I don't think my name is in that jacket. I don't think it's even, I think when I was writing in the credits, I took my name out. Like, so,
That's
there,
the nice
there's
thing about having the design. Yeah, you're putting together the designs like, oops, delete.
totally, yeah, exactly. I can take my name out of anything.
And also on the flip side of that, it doesn't have to be at the front of your portfolio either.
Right. It's not even in my portfolio, and it sucks because it's Sum 41. I want Sum 41 in my portfolio. They are a massive band, that's huge. If it had been an agreement, if we had got to a place where we were all happy, they would be the biggest band I've ever worked for, like doing album packaging. I've worked for bigger bands in terms of like merch and stuff, but album packaging for me is like a huge feather in my cap, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you did album art for Sum 41? Like, that's a big deal, but I don't tell anyone. Like I'm like, ugh, like don't show anybody that.
Well,
So, yes, there are dynamics in like what you post and what you do. Everyone posts, everyone has those duds, you know what I mean? And everyone has their thing that they love. So you just sort of want to like hone that, figure that out, and share your stuff as much as possible on Instagram. That's the way to do a portfolio. It's crazy. I have a website and everything. 99% of my clients come from Instagram, like full stop. And
Instagram.
so, yeah, that's the place to be. That's just where people find it, and learning how to like use tags and whatever and tag people. Um, my buddy Alex, same Alex, he has done this twice now of just for fun making merch designs for like rappers that he loves and is like just does it and then tags them in the post like, hey, this is just a fun design I did for at insert rapper name. I don't know who it was, but insert Drake, whatever. And that artist responded and was like, "This is sick. Can I buy it?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course." And now he's doing merch for like his favorite rapper. He did that with Slaughter to Prevail. He does like all their merch now. Uh, and it's just like, yeah, like the internet is a wonderful world for that kind of access to the people that we want to work with, you know? And if you're good enough, people will see it. So just like you
Yep.
kind of got to be brave and not be like it's that line of like put it out when it's good and tag people, but then like understand your flaws, understand stuff, and be ready for that feedback from your community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like finding ways to connect with other artists who just love what they do, it just amplifies that energy and that excitement. And
Mhm.
and I know for like illustrators, a lot of times leaning into like fan art on Instagram and stuff like that is a really great way to expand your reach and to kind of contextualize what you are capable of and
Mhm.
and be in the right place when someone actually notices your stuff and could actually use your skills.
Mhm.
So can you share before we go into like some of your day to day and some of the more nuts and bolts of what you do with your freelance stuff? Can you share just some of the artists who you've worked for, like just maybe like a top five, top 10?
Yeah, so I think my number my top man. Okay, so Falling in Reverse was a big one. I worked on Popular Monster for Epitaph Records. That was massive, and they wrapped the Whiskey A Go-Go in LA with all this art. I didn't do all the art. It was a compiled of many different artists, but I did the actual single Popular Monster. So I that one was big. Spirit Box is huge for me. Spirit Box is really cool, and they've been nominated now twice for Grammys, Best Metal Performance. Their new record's coming out, and I did everything for their new record. I did everything for Eternal Blue, their first full length. So I've actually I've ended up doing both their full length records, two EPs, and then they have one more EP that I didn't do. They went to someone else. Um, and then I would say Love and Death is a big one. That's a relatively unknown band themselves, but the lead singer of that band is Head from Korn. Um, and him and I got to have build like a really good relationship through that because they're an independent, smaller band, Love and Death. So I was dealing directly with Head, which was cool because I grew up listening to Korn. I love Korn. They're one of my all-time favorite bands.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm like having phone calls with him, and he's like in his hotel room, and we're chatting, and I'm just like pinching myself, like, what the heck? This is amazing. Um, but that was a really great experience in terms of kind of the whole process through that album, the Love and Death album, Perfectly Preserved. I was um I was really executing all the band's ideas at that point, and they're not designers and they're not artists in that way. They're musicians and they're great at it, and I couldn't do what they do, but they can't do what I do.
Yep.
Um, and um, and I really wasn't happy with the art on that one. And so it got to like we were like a year into it. They'd been recording the record, working on it. I was doing everything for them. Um, and then I think it was like a Thursday or a Friday, and the art was all due Monday. I called Brian Head and was like, "Hey man, like I just gotta tell you, like I'm not loving this. I think that what I'm about to deliver is lackluster. I listened to too many opinions. It was getting into a good design by committee thing again, which is very easy when you're working with bigger quote unquote rock stars.
Hmm.
Uh, because you want to make them happy, right? So you're just like taking, anything that they say is like, what about this? What about this? How about this color? You're like, sure, 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 sure. Never really being like, hey man, that's a bad idea. Um, so I kind of put my foot down nicely with him over the phone and was like, hey, give me till Monday. I'm going to deliver new artwork. all new artwork, 100%. Like I'm not using anything we've shot or done over the last year because it sucks. And he listened to me and he let me do it, and it's amazing. And he loves it. He was like, "This is one of my favorite album covers ever," which is huge. He's in Corn, and he's telling me that this is it was massive. So I would say that is probably my number one because that was just it was both like my childhood hero who I looked up to and had posters of on my wall, talking to him face to face. And I also had this experience of being able to step out of my shell and stand up for my art and be like, hey, look, like you're wrong, and say these
Yeah.
things to him. And
Yep.
that was and he listened to it and he listened, and I'm so proud of that packaging. It looks amazing. Still, I love it. It came out in 2022, I think, maybe 21. And I love it. It looks awesome. Um, so yeah, those would be probably my top. And then I have more stuff in the pipeline, potentially that's like super huge for me that I'm really excited about that I don't know if I can necessarily mention, but like
Yeah,
there's
that's
just some stuff
okay.
coming down that I'm super excited about that, feels like a little bit like that again of like working for a band that I grew up loving. And that just feels great. It's so affirming, and I constantly have to be affirmed. Oh, I forgot to say right here, Dayshell. They are one of my favorites too. That is a band. So he was the singer of Mice and Men, and then he
Oh, okay.
left. He left and started Dayshell, one of my favorite bands. He's one of my favorite singers. I love him. He's so great. Um, and he started doing solo stuff with like no budget after they put out a record on Sumerian and then they weren't on Sumerian anymore. And he put out a couple singles and the covers were awful. So I messaged him on Instagram and was like, "Hey, I'm a designer. I love your music. I want to work with you. I want to save you from putting out bad art on your records." And he replied and was like, and now we have worked together on his last two records. We're going to do his third one coming up. Like, we've become really good friends. I love Shaylee. He's awesome. But that's an example of just reaching out to these people you
Yeah, on Instagram.
utilize and being like, hey, man, like, here's what I do. And if you have a portfolio to back it up, it works.
Yeah, 100%.
Sounds crazy, but it works.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's that's art for you. That's you get artists together and you never know what's going to happen.
Totally.
All right. So I wanted to, we have a question here for our Q&A, but I did want to just kind of close this portion of the presentation out with, can you tell us like a day to day? Like what does your day look like when you're doing freelance work? How do you start? How does it end?
So yeah, I luckily I work from home, and so I get up and I get my son ready for preschool, and my wife and I will take him to preschool, and then we'll go to the gym and we'll work out for a bit, and I don't really have to start my day until about 10 a.m., which is awesome. So I start around 10. That's kind of my go-to time. If I'm busy, I'll start earlier, like if I've loaded up a bunch of projects. Usually spend the first half an hour, 40 minutes checking emails, just getting everything lined up of what I got to do for that day. I make a little list, sits next to me. And then I will hyper focus on the first project that is usually never necessarily the right project I should be focusing on. I am massively ADHD, so I will ride the wave of whatever I'm most excited about. I don't necessarily recommend that, but that is what I do all the time and always have. And I kept trying to change myself and be like, that's not right, but it works. I'm here and I'm doing it. So I tend to just go into what most excites me because I can get a lot of ideas out. I can sort of get my brain going. And then when you start to feel like exhausted with that stuff, and you start to kind of like hit the end of the road. It's lunchtime. I'll go eat something. I come down. That's when I sort of what I call eat my frogs. And that's when I just do all the stuff that I'm not excited about. Like, I got to get this done. Oh, this client asked for this change. That'll take 10 minutes. Like, I just do a whole bunch of like sort of pepper in a bunch of smaller stuff. That takes me about to like 2:30, 3 o'clock. And then I will dive into the next like big project that will sort of lead me into the next day, and I kind of just let that run. And if I'm having a really good flow, that's when I'll talk to my wife and I'll be like, "Honey, can I have a late night? Are you good with putting Fox to bed, whatnot?" Sometimes she is, sometimes she isn't. Um, which is totally fair. Work-life balance is important. But being a creative, you also know that sometimes you get these waves that you have to ride.
Yes.
And I still will ride them. And if you get them, you're like, yeah, okay, I'm working till 3 in the morning. I don't do that often anymore. I used to do that a lot more when I was younger, but now with a kid, like I have to, the balance is uh, much more important. Um, but yeah, I tend to like ride waves a lot and just, go where my heart takes me, which maybe isn't necessarily the thing that's due soonest. Um, so yeah, I do use a calendar to help me. I do have like reminders and due dates and stuff to keep me in check. And I'm always sort of still learning myself of like, okay, how long and project blocking and being like, how long will that take? Will that be 10 minutes or is my brain saying 10 minutes, but it will actually be an hour because I'm going to get stuck into like kerning for an hour. You know what I mean? Like just the fine detail stuff. So, but that's a general layout of most of my days.
Okay. Yeah, you kind of have it's a little organic, but you also have a little structure there that and you've worked enough days that you've probably seen the prototype of every type of day possible at this point, right?
Right. Yeah, I've done the things where it's like wake up at 4 a.m. and that's how CEOs run their life. And it's like, man, it doesn't make it's just like do what works for you. And this is supposed to be fun, and if you're waking up miserable and being like, this sucks, I don't want to do art, then don't like, do what works for you. Always say, because yeah, you see all these things on Instagram of like how to improve your life and improve your flow and your productivity. And it's like, yeah, there's all these things, but like I don't think it applies to creatives so much because our creative brains are just so, I don't want to say flighty, but like, we'll glom onto things left and right. And that's sort of what creates the palette within our brain. You're pulling ideas from everywhere. I have a bunch of ideas here, and this really works on this project, and you work on this project, and then all of a sudden you do something in that project, and you're like, oh, that reminds me, this would look really good in this project I'm working on over here. And all of a sudden you just like jump over here and you're jumping back and forth. And then it seems like chaos, but like what you're creating at the end is like it was truly passionate and like you were involved and like you were living it, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe it wasn't the best in terms of like timeline and 9 to 5, but like that's why freelancing is cool. I'm my boss. I don't have to, no one can tell me what project I should be working on at what time. If I'm getting towards being late on something, I have never, ever, ever, ever been late on anything. I've never missed a due date, ever. And if I'm going to miss a due date, I tell people far in advance. So my crazy flightiness is my business, but I would never, ever sacrifice the client's needs for me being crazy. So I'll allow myself to be crazy within my process. But if something's coming up and it's due and I got to get it done, then I have to buckle down and do it. And
Yep.
don't miss deadlines. If you miss deadlines, you're never working again.
Don't miss deadlines.
Yeah.
Well, that's the perfect advice to leave on before we go into our Q&A. Before we do that, I just wanted to send off our podcast audience. I wanted to thank you, Kevin, for taking time for joining us this evening. I know we could talk for hours on end, and next year when we have this, it'd be great to have you back on.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, this is fun. I can talk for hours. So,
Absolutely. Can you let our listeners know where we can see your work?
yeah. So my company name is Soft Surrogate, SoftSurrogate. And you can go to softsurrogate.com is my website. It hasn't been updated in a while. I'm mostly on Instagram now. And then it's just instagram.com/soft surrogate. And you can see my stuff there. I try and keep it pretty relevant and pretty up to date. But yeah, that's my handle for pretty much everything on Facebook and Instagram and whatever else I'm on. I don't even know.
All right, well, I'll make sure we link it with the show notes, your social media and your website. And
Amazing.
all right, well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Before we do Q&A, I just want to let you know again that this has been the Duluth Art Institute Professional Development Series. I'm Jesse Switters. For more information on our upcoming classes and our galleries, visit our website at duluthartinstitute.org.